On a calm October afternoon in 2005, a devastating incident forever altered the lives of those involved. 14-month-old Kyle Laserkick was discovered unresponsive at home, his small body showing unexplained injuries. His nanny, Ada Quadrush, urgently called 911, unaware that the moments that followed would transform her life. As paramedics hurried to the house, the severity of Kyle's condition became clear. Although Ada tried desperately to help him, the child's injuries were grave. What could have led to such a heartbreaking outcome? The truth remained difficult to uncover. Ada Quadros was born on September 13, 1977, in the seaside city of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Luz Fernandez, a teacher. As the oldest of four, Ada consistently stood out in school, even earning awards in academic competitions. Her childhood was joyful and driven by aspirations to grow and improve. She later recalled spending much of her youth with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, where she cherished her bond with nature and animals. She described this time as one of the happiest periods of her life. Although Ada's family was not impoverished, they also weren't well off. As a teenager, she searched for ways to help financially. Along with her sister and a friend, she created a small group that performed at children's parties. After finishing high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law, but limited finances forced her to abandon her studies. Even so, she remained determined to succeed and support her family. With that purpose in mind, she entered the U.S. visa lottery. Like many young people in Peru and across Latin America, Ada viewed the United States as a place full of possibilities. She was resolved to move there, work diligently, earn a better living, and open the door to a brighter future for herself and her loved ones. Her family was overjoyed for her and sold some of their possessions to help raise the funds she needed for the trip. She planned to settle in Texas, where she would initially stay with relatives. In early 2004, she found her first job as a waitress at a restaurant. After a while, she joined an agency that placed nannies in private homes. Through this job, she eventually met the Laserkick family. The Laserkick family included Father Michael, often called Mike, Mother Renee, their oldest daughter Alyssa, and twin sons, Ryan and Kyle. Little is publicly known about their history, other than that Mike and Renee married in 2000. Soon after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first child, Alyssa. Only 4 months after Alyssa was born, Renee became pregnant again, this time with twins, Kyle and Ryan. The Laserkicks wanted to hire a reliable nanny to care for the twins once Renee returned to work. Since Alyssa was already settled in a daycare where she had made several friends, they decided she would continue attending there. The couple interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. At 27 years old, she was young but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, well-mannered, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so she could spend a few weeks with her, explaining the household routines, where things were, and what was expected of her. She also wanted to observe how Ada handled the young twins, who were just over a year old. The family had one specific request. They needed assurance that Ada could commit to staying with them for 18 months, and Ada committed to this arrangement. Initially, it was agreed that she would only spend the day at the Laserkick household, but after some time, they asked her to live in, and Ada agreed. From then on, she only left on weekends to stay at her uncle's house. Everything seemed to go smoothly. The Laserkick family was pleased with Ada's work and grew fond of her, trusting her completely. Numerous photos captured happy moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, everything changed in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Laserkick family that her uncles were returning to Peru before moving on to Germany. Ada was prepared to go with them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this was disappointing news for the couple, since it was not what they had agreed upon. Eventually, they understood and only asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that point on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Laserkick home. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house each night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Laserkick family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates for Wednesday, October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada complied and fed the kids. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw they were well, and after interviewing the candidates, spent over an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, Kyle woke up crying, which was unusual. The twins were typically heavy sleepers and never woke up on their own. It always took someone to wake them. Nonetheless, Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the children's room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Ada's care before heading to work. Renee woke up just before 9:30 and spent some time with the twins. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to both him and Kyle, and left for work. The children were fine, with nothing out of the ordinary except Kyle's early wake-up. That day, their older sister, Alyssa, went to daycare as usual. But things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, highly agitated, saying that one of the children, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. After providing the address, the operator gave Ada instructions to perform CPR on the child. Ada followed the instructions while paramedics were on their way. A few minutes later, they arrived at the house and took over Kyle's care. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very distressed, explained that after lunch she had put Kyle in his crib and returned to get his brother. But when she got back with Ryan, Kyle started vomiting and stopped breathing. While paramedics attended to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of his high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she fetched his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to catch the vomit, and when she returned, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver Renee had taught her in case one of the children stopped breathing. But it didn't work, and she also attempted CPR. After initial treatment, the paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital. When Renee arrived at the house, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still at the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the drive, Renee called her husband, and they met at the medical center. A few minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Dallas Children's Hospital. The Laserkicks returned home, left Ada to care for Ryan, and headed to the Dallas Children's Hospital. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee started worrying that Ada might be too nervous to look after Ryan properly, so she called a friend to assist the nanny at the house. Shortly after, her friend arrived at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for her. She asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to her account, Ada said that Kyle was standing between the playroom and the kitchen when he suddenly collapsed. Ada claimed she dropped a plate she was holding, picked Kyle up, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. She recalled Ada mentioning that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. She didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, saying she loved Kyle and would never hurt him. She tried to calm the very upset nanny, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. Meanwhile, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Laserkick family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle reported that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple bruises on his head, arm, and left shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something had to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, though survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a 6th floor. Initially, Renee couldn't believe it. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. But the doctors clearly explained the extent of Kyle's head injuries and the force required to cause them. With this information, the possibility of an accident seemed implausible. Renee immediately called another friend to pick up Ryan and take him away from the house. While this was happening at the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to leave to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police car drove by the house. Upon seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began crying uncontrollably and shouting, "No, no, no!" She collapsed to the floor behind a door, repeatedly insisting she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada as the person who had called 911 about the injured child. She had been the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. When Ada was able to speak, she explained that she had taken Kyle out of his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor. She was patting his back to help him burp when he suddenly began to vomit. Ada said she went to the kitchen to get a container to catch the vomit, as Renee disliked stains on the floor. While she was cleaning, Kyle turned blue, fell, and started convulsing. She claimed she took him to the living room, called 911, and followed the dispatcher's instructions. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, detectives told Ada that her story did not account for the injuries Kyle had. Ada suggested that Kyle might have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom. But the officers noted that the playroom floor was covered with soft rugs, making this explanation unlikely. Trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle might have hit his head on the door frame when she carried him on her hip. At the officer's insistence, Ada demonstrated how Kyle could have been hurt and mentioned that Mike and Renee often bumped Kyle's head without any problems. The officer checked the spot where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury didn't seem severe enough to cause the extensive damage the doctors described, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also stated that she had never shaken or hit either of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. Meanwhile, crime scene investigation units arrived to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who had stayed at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While several friends cleaned the house, they found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By Friday, October 14th, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid indescribable pain, the couple authorized the removal of life support, after which Kyle passed away. 3 days later, on October 17th, the detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. She had Kyle sitting on the kitchen counter, and the child fell, landing head first on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head, so she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because when she arrived home from work, she complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family. So she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The case of Kyle's death went to trial in the second half of 2005. The doctor who examined Kyle at Dallas Children's Hospital testified that when he received Kyle, the child was already unconscious. He described multiple hematomas on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head and shoulder and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. Kyle had 3 main areas of hematomas on his head, indicating 3 separate impacts. He added that the bruises were relatively recent, one possibly 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, indicative of severe trauma, even though there were no broken bones. The brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, whereas the normal level is 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, he concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. He suggested the type of injuries could result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, like a kitchen cabinet door. A Dallas County forensic expert testified that the autopsy revealed multiple overlapping small hematomas on Kyle's scalp, along with a couple of punctate abrasions on the right temple, separated by over a centimeter. There were also 4 or 5 pairs of similar lesions on his head. His brain showed significant hemorrhage and swelling, with retinal hemorrhages in both eyes, requiring substantial force to cause such injuries. She concluded that the cause of death was severe head injuries from blunt force trauma, agreeing that Kyle's head might have been struck multiple times against the wooden door of the kitchen cabinet. She ruled out the possibility that Kyle had merely bumped into a door frame or fallen from the kitchen counter. Another critical testimony came from a forensic analyst who measured the distance between the fasteners on the broken kitchen cabinet door and found it matched the punctate abrasions on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and discovered 2 DNA traces, one of which had a much higher contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The lesser trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was Mike's turn to testify. He stated that Kyle was fine on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he prepared breakfast that morning, opening and closing the kitchen cabinet doors to get utensils and food, and that all doors were in perfect condition, including the one later found inexplicably repaired with tape. The parents shared that they had breakfast with the children and played with blocks, with the twins crawling around a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easy to conclude that the events leading to Kyle's death occurred when no other adults were in the house except Ada. The case prosecutor stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle might never be known for sure, but based on the evidence presented at trial, she painted a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch, and Ada, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, might have taken him out of his high chair without noticing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage might have triggered the vicious attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, with the door's screws leaving marks on the child. After all the testimonies and closing arguments, the jury went to deliberate. Upon returning, they found Ada Quadrush guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. As the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Luz Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She proclaimed that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and vowed to start over an appeal. After the jury members left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their deceased son, recounting his brief 14 months of life from birth to the last photo taken days before his death. Family members spoke about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was sentenced the following year in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, arguing that Ada's conviction was based on racial prejudice and ineffective public defense. However, appealing required money for legal representation and process costs, which the family did not have. Undeterred, they sought support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino communities in the United States, and solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintained her innocence and took every opportunity for interviews to assert it. Their persistence paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal representation filed an appeal, citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial. After reviewing the case, the appeals court dismissed 3 of the claims but agreed with 2. This was enough for the judges to overturn the conviction and annul the trial due to irregularities. Following this decision, Ada's family began another fundraising effort to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The trial took place in Collin County's Justice Hall. The defense argued that Kyle had fallen from the kitchen counter on October 12th, injuring his head, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the doorframe. This time, the defense presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises might have been caused at the hospital during catheter insertion to assess brain swelling. The prosecution fiercely challenged this testimony. David Gardner, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense. He proposed alternative explanations for the broken cabinet door, though he didn't entirely rule out that Kyle's head could have been struck against it. A poignant moment in the trial was Mike's testimony, where he described Kyle's last 2 days connected to numerous tubes and machines, eventually being taken off life support and dying in his parents' arms. The defense argued there wasn't enough evidence to convict Ada, but the prosecution highlighted the medical findings and the numerous times Ada changed her story. After the sessions concluded, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recordings again. Ultimately, they once again found Ada Quadrush, then 33, guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment without parole. Back in prison, Ada joined the prison volleyball team, learned Braille, and won an art contest with a drawing of the Virgin Mary, which she auctioned to raise funds for a new appeal. Ada, from her cell, maintains her innocence, her spirit unbroken as she and her family continue their fight for an appeal, seeking a chance to prove what they believe to be the truth. Case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister, Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, an open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score. And to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad. And he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, She was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal, she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors. Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail, frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon, LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion, who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch. But soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, La Barre, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, La Barre met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLorge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and La Barre remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy La Barre was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin. There were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether. And when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Hanny Michael and several other men confessed to horrific crimes. But judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Details about the early life of Amanda Lewis are scarce, but it is known that she was born in the early 1980s. Her mother, Brenda, raised her in Alabama, USA. At some point, Brenda married a man named Charles Burns, who became Amanda's stepfather and was actively involved in her upbringing. Amanda described herself as a restless, talkative, and sometimes problematic child who often struggled to follow rules. These traits might have contributed to her becoming a mother at the young age of 15. Unfortunately, her early motherhood ended in tragedy when her baby, Alex, died at 16 months old from a seizure disorder. Amanda recounted that on the day Alex passed away, she had left him sleeping while she took a bath. When she returned, she found him not breathing and rushed him to the emergency room, but it was too late. Later, while still in Alabama, Amanda entered what seemed to be a stable relationship resulting in the birth of 2 children, Adriana Elaine Hutto and Andrew Jordan Hutto. Adriana was born on September 16, 1999, and his younger brother, Andrew, affectionately known as AJ, followed about a year later. Despite sharing the same last name, many sources indicate that the kids were half-brothers with different fathers. After the relationship ended, Amanda relocated with her children to a small community called Esto in Florida. Esto, a town of approximately 360 residents, had historically relied on the timber industry and more recently agriculture and manufacturing. It also attracted tourists seeking natural beauty and tranquility. Amanda quickly adapted to her new environment, appreciating the peace and basic amenities it offered. She trained as a nursing assistant and secured a job at a nearby care and rehabilitation center, which provided her with stability. Despite the semblance of a stable life with a steady job, a simple home, and her 2 children, Amanda faced significant challenges. Her eldest daughter, Adriana, who was 7 at the time, was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. ADHD is a common neurodevelopmental disorder in children characterized by difficulties in maintaining attention, impulsivity, and high levels of activity. Amanda found it challenging to form a close and calm relationship with Adriana, who required medication to manage her symptoms. The difficulties with Adriana contrasted with her relationship with AJ, which seemed to be less strained. She got along well with him as he was a calm child who could spend hours playing with his toy tractors. The contrast between the siblings' personalities was striking. Adriana required more attention both at home and at school, where the teachers were aware of her condition. However, this did not prevent Amanda from being called in on several occasions because her daughter had gotten into fights with other classmates, used foul language, or caused some sort of trouble. Additionally, Adriana occasionally wet her pants. Despite these setbacks, her teacher noted that her behavior was improving, and she was a smart girl who loved to read. At home, Adriana displayed the same behaviors, leading Amanda to frequently resort to timeout as a form of punishment. This practice involves removing the misbehaving child from the area where the incident occurred, placing them in a separate spot, and leaving them alone to calm down and, if possible, reflect on their actions. However, as Amanda later admitted, not all moments were reflective. On some occasions, she used physical punishment to curb her daughter's misbehavior. At some point, Amanda met a new partner, a young man named Alan Carnley, who also came from Alabama. He had just come out of a failed relationship, from which he had 2 children. It appears that Alan's breakup was amicable, as there were no custody issues, and his children frequently visited and spent time with him and his new family. The events that unfolded in the summer of 2007 would change their lives forever. The family lived in a refurbished trailer on a spacious plot of land. That summer was particularly hot in Florida, so Alan decided to buy a pool to help beat the heat. The pool provided an opportunity for family fun, as his kids were also visiting at the time. The pool excited everyone, and the couple set strict rules for Amanda's younger children, prohibiting them from using it without an adult present. Amanda even removed the ladder to prevent the kids from accessing the pool unsupervised, storing it in the shed to eliminate any temptation. On Wednesday, August 8, 2007, early in the morning, Amanda returned home exhausted after a night shift at work. Eager to catch up on lost sleep, she decided to take a nap before starting the day's family activities, which included shopping for school supplies. That morning, the kids woke up and, according to Amanda, didn't want breakfast. After saying goodbye to her partner as he left for work, she left the kids watching cartoons on TV. One of Alan's sons, who was also in the house, was woken up by his father but was too sleepy to stay awake. He barely heard Adriana and AJ arguing before dozing off again. He heard them yelling, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, so he went back to sleep. According to Amanda's later account, she woke up sometime before noon and began tidying up the house before heading out with her children to shop for school supplies. Since they would have to wait a bit, she suggested that the kids go outside to play while she finished her chores. At one point, AJ came into the house to tell her that Adriana was in the pool. Initially, this didn't alarm her. She assumed her daughter was just playing near the pool. She instructed AJ to call Adriana and have both kids come back inside. Amanda then went back into the house, picked up her cell phone, and called her partner. She was talking to Alan while walking towards the window overlooking the pool. Everything changed when she saw AJ standing on a ladder at the edge of the pool, splashing his hands in the water. Amanda immediately ran outside, pulled her son away from the pool's edge, and was horrified to see Adriana floating face down in the water, her skin blue and lifeless. She described how she stretched her arms from the poolside, grabbed her daughter's feet, and pulled her out of the water. Once she had Adriana in her arms, she laid her on the grass, face up. The phone call with Alan was still active, and she screamed to him what had happened. Alan instructed her to call 911. As emergency personnel arrived, Amanda began performing CPR on Adriana, relying on her training as a nurse, although she admitted she had never had to use those skills in a real-life situation until then. The first responders on the scene were firefighters, with Unit Chief Charles taking over the resuscitation efforts as they awaited the arrival of medical and police teams. Their efforts seemed to yield some results. Adriana showed faint signs of life. Given the severity of Adriana's condition and the lack of advanced medical facilities in the small town of Esto, she was airlifted, accompanied by her mother, to the nearest hospital. Amid all the commotion, Alan's son woke up and, looking out the window, saw the frantic efforts to revive his stepsister. Before leaving, Amanda shouted to him to take care of his half-brother, AJ, and bring him inside. Later, the police contacted Amanda's children's grandparents to come and pick up AJ. Upon arriving at the hospital, the emergency doctor immediately took over Adriana's care, with a team working intensively to stabilize her and restore her vital signs. For a moment, it seemed they had succeeded. Adriana had a pulse. Tragically, after nearly an hour of effort, they lost the battle. Adriana, 7 years old, was pronounced dead at 5:05 that afternoon. Amanda later recounted that when she was told her daughter had passed, she felt her stomach churn. She was allowed to see Adriana one last time, kissing and hugging her, knowing it would be their final goodbye. In the eyes of the doctors, emergency staff, and police, it was a tragic accident, much like many others involving young children and bodies of water such as pools. While it was a tragic event, it could have easily marked the end of the story. However, miles away from the hospital where Adriana was declared deceased, her younger brother, AJ, left everyone stunned with a shocking account. Upon arriving at his grandparents' house as they tried to calm him down, the little boy suddenly said that his mother had drowned Adriana. Naturally, upon hearing such a statement, Brenda and Charles, Amanda's mother and stepfather, were completely shocked and bewildered. The couple talked with the boy for a while, thinking he might have misunderstood something. But after asking him some questions and finding his answers convincing, they decided to take AJ to the police station to speak with the officers. With the grandparents' permission, AJ was questioned by the police, during which he stated that his mother had held his sister underwater as a punishment. According to the boy's account that morning, Adriana had taken a bottle of window cleaner and sprayed it all over the living room, the curtains, and the TV. AJ continued, saying that when his mother discovered what had happened, she became very angry, dragged her 7-year-old daughter to the pool, put her in it, and held her head under the water until she stopped moving. This story was repeated multiple times during 2 interviews with investigators and a third with a child expert. Although several aspects of the boy's story varied across the different interviews, the claim that his mother had submerged his sister's head underwater remained consistent. As a result, the authorities launched an investigation, starting with a thorough inspection of the house where the incident occurred. During this search, several things became evident. The bedroom shared by AJ and his sister was in disarray, with a broken bunk bed, complete disorganization, and a strong smell of urine. The word neglect echoed in the investigators' minds. Aside from the neglect, what shocked the detectives the most was the lack of toys in a room shared by 2 children. Naturally, Amanda was summoned to the police station to provide a statement and respond to her son's accusations. She appeared astonished and vehemently denied that her son's account had any truth to it. When confronted with the results of the house inspection, she explained that there were few toys in the children's room because she had thrown out the broken ones and donated the rest as a punishment for Adriana's bad behavior. As for the overwhelming smell of urine, she had no choice but to acknowledge it, explaining that Adriana often wet the bed. The investigators requested that Amanda undergo a polygraph test. She agreed immediately and successfully passed the test. However, her situation was further complicated by the autopsy results on her daughter's body. The post-mortem examinations confirmed that the cause of death was drowning, but they also revealed clear signs of assault on the girl's face. There were visible bruises that covered nearly the entire face and closely matched the size of an adult hand. With this evidence, on September 5, 2007, Amanda was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, facing the possibility of a life sentence or even the death penalty. The proceedings to prepare the case for trial began immediately. Although the authorities offered Amanda a plea deal, which would have required her to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a 10-year sentence, she refused and chose to face trial for the charge against her. In the months leading up to the trial, investigators scrutinized all of AJ's statements to ensure that the young boy was not fabricating or confusing events. During interviews, they asked him questions such as what he was watching on TV that day and what other events occurred. He mentioned cartoons airing at that time, a helicopter flying overhead, and tree-cutting activities near his house to protect power lines. All these events were verified, showing that AJ remembered the day perfectly. Investigators also conducted interviews with family members, neighbors, co-workers, educators, and first responders who arrived at Amanda's house following the 911 call. The goal was to understand the family dynamics and ascertain the truth of what had happened. One of the interviewees was the doctor who had informed Amanda of Adriana's death. The doctor noted that Amanda's reaction to the tragic news was peculiar, as she showed no signs of grief. Instead, she asked where the vending machine was. With all the evidence gathered, the case went to trial on February 9, 2008. Over the next 4 days, Amanda's fate would be decided. Witnesses for both the prosecution and the defense took the stand. Authorities who responded to Amanda's emergency call in August 2007 described the dramatic scene they encountered, seeing Adriana clinging to life before she ultimately passed away. Testimonies were also heard from Alan and his children, who spoke about the family dynamics and details of the day in question. Amanda's boyfriend recounted what he heard while on the phone with Amanda during the incident. Alan's son had little to contribute as he had been asleep all morning and only emerged after the commotion began. Alan's daughter wasn't present on the day of the incident, but she narrated an earlier event at her aunt Amanda's pool. She described Amanda trying to teach Adriana to swim despite the child's terror, at one point threatening to let her go. She also stated that she often supervised the children while Amanda slept, witnessing Adriana being punished by being confined to a room for an entire day. Testimonies from Amanda's co-workers were particularly damning. They recounted an instance when Amanda, furious, brought Adriana to the nursing home, repeatedly saying she would gladly take her life. These harsh words spoken in front of the child were seen as inappropriate and cruel by her colleagues. On that particular morning, Adriana had taken a marker from Amanda's car and scribbled all over the interior, even writing "loser" in one spot. The trial highlighted how Adriana's ADHD had prevented Amanda from forming a positive relationship with her. But two testimonies stood out, those of Amanda and her son, AJ. As we saw at the beginning, AJ, after 6 months of not seeing his mother, took a while to recognize her and cried when he did. During her testimony on the stand, Amanda acknowledged that her daughter's behavioral problems had made their relationship difficult. She described Adriana as extroverted and hyperactive, noting that she was very much like herself, stubborn and always by her side. Amanda claimed that Adriana sometimes displayed violent behavior, recalling an incident where the girl threatened her younger brother with a sharp kitchen tool. Amanda also admitted that she had once placed Adriana in a specialized institution for 6 days. She confessed to the court that she might not have loved her daughter as much as she should have. Amanda stated that she often punished Adriana by confining her to her room, the same smelly and dirty room that shocked the investigators. She also took away most of the toys as a punishment for leaving them scattered around. Amanda admitted that she occasionally lost her temper and would slap or spank Adriana, such as during the incident when Adriana had written on the car with a marker. Amanda described how Adriana had just begun learning to swim, could move her arms and legs a bit, but was terrified of putting her head underwater. Amanda insisted that she was not teaching Adriana to submerge her head. When asked if she knew how to swim, Amanda replied that she did. Sticking to her version of events, Amanda admitted that when AJ told her Adriana was in the pool, she didn't immediately check on her. Instead, she called her partner and only looked out the window later. She saw AJ at the pool's edge trying to reach Adriana, who was splashing in the water. That was when, according to her, she rushed to help but was already too late. Amanda's defense argued that Adriana's death was a tragic accident. They claimed that the girl had pushed her brother's toy cart to the pool's edge, climbed on it, and used a tray to scoop out insects from the water. When she leaned over, the edge of the inflatable pool gave way and Adriana fell in. During the trial, the prosecution questioned Amanda about how she had pulled Adriana out of the pool. Amanda admitted that she hadn't given her daughter breakfast or her medication that morning, claiming that Adriana had said she didn't feel well. It later emerged that neither child had eaten breakfast or lunch by the time of the incident around midday. Another critical piece of testimony came from the autopsy report on Adriana. The original forensic specialist did not testify as he had been dismissed for negligence in over 30 autopsies. Instead, the director of investigations at the medical examiner's office explained the autopsy process and findings, emphasizing the bruises on Adriana's face. Amanda's defense strongly challenged this testimony, questioning whether the marks were definitively from a hand. The expert had to admit that she couldn't be absolutely certain. Then came the pivotal moment in the trial, AJ's testimony. In a lengthy and exhausting interrogation for a 7-year-old, AJ recounted the events he had described many times before to investigators. This time, he included a drawing he had made during psychological support sessions, illustrating what had happened. After his long testimony, AJ faced cross-examination from Amanda's defense, who pressed him until he became visibly confused and tired, giving contradictory answers. Despite this, the prosecution deemed him a credible witness, supported by other significant details, such as the fact that Adriana was tall enough to stand in the pool and easily lift her head above the water. With these elements, the trial proceeded, culminating in a dramatic and crucial phase where the truth about Adriana's death hung in the balance. In the end, while the defense argued that Adriana's tragic death was a very unfortunate accident, the prosecution maintained that Amanda had maliciously punished her daughter. The prosecution argued that Amanda had reached her breaking point due to immense stress and exhaustion. Having tried numerous ways to discipline her daughter, none of which seemed effective. In a moment of overwhelming frustration, Amanda snapped. After all testimonies concluded, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours, including lunch, before returning with a verdict. They found Amanda Lewis guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. The following month, during the sentencing hearing, the judge issued a life sentence plus an additional 30 years for aggravated child abuse. Amanda has attempted several appeals, none of which have been successful. She remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution. Reports following the trial's conclusion indicated that AJ was cared for by his grandparents in the months after the incident. However, once the judicial process was complete, AJ was reportedly put up for adoption. Since then, his life has been kept private. By 2024, AJ would be 24 years old, and we can only hope that his life has been significantly better than how it began. Case of Samantha Josephson. In the heart of Columbia, South Carolina, amidst the energy of a bustling college town, the life of a young student named Samantha Lee Josephson took a dark and tragic turn. Her story gripped the nation and shed light on the potential dangers that can exist in the most routine aspects of our lives. Samantha was a shining presence on the University of South Carolina campus. Tragically, a routine night out led to a series of events that would profoundly impact the lives of those who knew her. Samantha Lee Josephson was born to her parents, Seymour and Marcy Josephson, in Princeton, New Jersey, and grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey. As a student, she attended the University of South Carolina, where she majored in political science. Samantha, who was a senior in college, planned on graduating in 2019 and attending Drexel University School of Law, where she wanted to study to become an international law specialist. Samantha had earned full and partial scholarships to Drexel University and Rutgers respectively, and aspired to practice international law. Samantha was a member of the Alpha Gamma Delta sorority. She studied abroad in Barcelona and visited Madrid and Paris during her time in South Carolina. Samantha was described as amazingly beautiful with a wonderful smile. Samantha had a boyfriend named Greg, and the couple was very close, staying in constant contact through texting and calling. They had plans to start a future together, even when Samantha was going to be attending law school. Greg was going to move in with her and support her. Everything seemed to be going well until Friday, March 29, 2019, when she never returned to her apartment. And things took a turn for the worse for Samantha. On the evening of March 28, 2019, Samantha planned to go out with her roommate and some friends in Columbia, South Carolina. Her boyfriend, Greg, was supposed to join them as well, but he was back in his hometown at the time. Still, he told her to go out and have fun without him. Samantha was feeling gloomy after hearing about a family member's illness, and what she needed was to distract herself a bit. And going out with friends was the perfect opportunity to lift her spirits. The group met up and went to a few different bars before finally settling at a bar known as the Bird Dog Bar, which was located in an area called 5 Points, a popular spot for students to hang out. Even though Samantha was enjoying herself with her friends, she continuously texted her boyfriend, Greg, pleading with him to make a 2-hour drive to visit her in Columbia, because she needed emotional support. The couple had already made plans to see each other the following weekend, so her boyfriend never changed his mind and decided to stay where he was, but he still kept in constant communication with her. At around 2 a.m., Samantha decided to return to her apartment alone. She called an Uber, popular ride-sharing service, using a mobile app, as this was a common practice among her and her peers. On that occasion, fate would lead her into the hands of a murderer. While Samantha waited for the Uber, she had one last phone conversation with Greg at around 2:04 a.m. Samantha told him she was going home and had taken an Uber. This was a routine she had followed many times before, using Uber to get to and from the bars, as the distance was too far to walk. A few minutes after placing the request with an Uber, a car pulled up to the curb, where Samantha and a group of other weary bar customers were waiting for lifts. Security cameras captured her approaching the car, only to realize that the driver was there for someone else. After doing an about-face, she is seen retreating to her spot on the sidewalk. Samantha was wearing an orange shirt and black pants. After some time, a black Chevrolet Impala, driven by a man who was later identified as Nathaniel David Rowland, pulled up into the space in front of her. Samantha said goodbye to Greg, and she opened the door and exchanged a quick word with the person behind the wheel before climbing into the back seat. Once she was inside the car, it sped off away. Within a short time, the Uber that Samantha had ordered arrived at the designated pickup location. From that point in time, no one other than the 21-year-old political science major student and the man driving the Impala knew that she had gotten into the wrong car. The CCTV footage would later show that the black Chevrolet Impala circled the area numerous times before targeting Samantha. Anyone who has ever spent time in 5 Points was aware that college students gathered in the streets after the bars closed to wait for their rides, and watching him drive around the area suggested that he knew exactly what he was doing that night. Samantha's boyfriend, Greg, used the Find My Friends app on her phone to track her movements and ensure she got home safely that night. However, he noticed that she was traveling in the opposite direction from her apartment. At first, he thought she might be going to a friend's house, but when he later texted her to check if she was okay, he received no response. He then tried calling her, but she did not answer her phone. Greg tried texting Samantha several more times, but noticed that his messages were delivered but not read, indicating that she never read any of them. Later, her phone location stopped sharing, which shocked Greg as it had never happened before. Greg later thought that Samantha might have misplaced her phone in the Uber, but still decided to call her friends and roommate to find out if they had heard from her, or if she had made it home. Unfortunately, nobody had heard from her or seen her. Greg hoped she would turn up in the morning and tried to get some sleep. The following day in the morning, Samantha was not present. Her roommates were worried about her location and reported her as missing. Her boyfriend Greg also drove for 2 hours from Columbia to help search for her. A little over 3 to 4 hours after the missing person report was filed, the dead body of a young woman later confirmed to be Samantha Josephson was found by a group of turkey hunters in a wooded area in New Zion, about 65 miles away from 5 Points, less than 24 hours after she was last seen on surveillance video getting into a black car. Shocked by the gruesome discovery, the hunters immediately called 911, and representatives from the local sheriff's office were promptly dispatched to the scene. After an autopsy was performed, it became clear that Samantha was the victim of a violent attack. Her body had more than 120 separate stab wounds, with injuries to her face, head, neck, hands, upper body, legs, and feet. It was also determined that her fingernails were hacked to pieces as she tried to shield herself from the razor-sharp tool used to attack her. The evidence suggests that she was stabbed with a double-bladed knife and then dragged to the woods. The autopsy revealed the extent of her blood loss, as her body only contained 20 milliliters of blood, compared to the typical 4L in the human body. Investigators were dumbfounded by the sheer brutality of the crime. The investigation revealed that Samantha had accidentally gotten into the wrong car, thinking it was her Uber. The Uber driver she had called was seen arriving shortly after, but when he found she was not there, he canceled the trip and left. It is likely that the car she was in was not the Uber, as she was murdered soon after. Investigators believe the driver used the child-proof locks to trap her inside, as the doors could only be opened from the outside. The description of the car, a black Chevrolet Impala, was quickly released to the public in the hopes of finding the perpetrator before he struck again. Fortunately, the car was spotted by officers on routine patrol a few days later, and the driver, Nathaniel Rowland, was arrested after a short chase. A search of Rowland's car revealed a child's car seat surrounded by what seemed to be bloodstains. There were also large quantities of blood on the passenger seat and in the trunk. Samantha's cell phone was also found in the car, and it was discovered that Rowland had tried to sell it to a pawn shop earlier that day. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Rowland continuously denied any knowledge of Samantha's kidnapping and murder. A physical examination revealed traces of Samantha's DNA under his fingernails, but none of his DNA was found on her. Detectives speculated that Samantha was the victim of a sudden and violent attack, and the activated child-proof locks in the car suggest that Rowland trapped her inside as soon as she got in, leaving her helpless as he stabbed her repeatedly with a double-bladed knife. She was caught unawares by the ferocious attack and had to put a lot of effort into trying to defend herself, which would account for the multiple stab wounds found on her hands, as well as the condition of her mangled fingernails. Considering the excessive force that was used against her, it's understandable that Samantha was not able to scratch her attacker, which would have left his skin cells under her nails. After the dreadful act was done, Roland drove to a farmer's access road in New Zion, where only a local would have known it existed, and dumped Samantha's body in the nearby woods. After arriving back home, Roland spent much of the day posting on social media as if nothing had happened, since he lived there nearly all of his life, and his residence was only minutes away from where the remains were found. That was two more strong pieces of evidence, pointed fingers to him as the killer. A peek into Roland's background revealed that he was a devout churchgoer who had attended South Carolina State University in 2017, although there are no records of him graduating. It's unclear what he was doing for employment at the time. Roland had one past felony arrest from October 2018 for obtaining a signature or property under false pretenses. There was also a woman who was carjacked by two men, one of them being Roland. They assaulted her and forced her to drive to an ATM, where they took her money. They then forced her to drive home, where they robbed her of even more of her belongings, including a PlayStation 4. Roland was never convicted of robbing the woman, but he did sell some of her stolen belongings, including the PlayStation 4. When detectives obtained a search warrant for the apartment of his girlfriend, named Maria Howard, in New Zion, where he lived, they combed the trash bins behind the apartment and found a sock and bandana, allegedly belonging to Roland, that were heavily stained with Samantha's blood. The detectives also found a white sheet with blood on it, a roll of duct tape, bleach wipes with blood on them, and a two-bladed knife that seemed to have blood on it. Tests would later confirm that the blood found on the two-bladed knife as well as blood found on the sheets, in the car, and on the bleach wipes was a match for Samantha Josephson. With the evidence against him mounting swiftly, Roland was initially charged with possessing a weapon during a violent crime, the kidnapping, and the murder of Samantha Josephson. The trial would be grueling for the family, with Nathaniel Roland pleading not guilty, claiming he was innocent, even with the mountain of evidence against him. When the trial began in the summer of 2021, Roland's defense team argued that their client was an innocent man, based largely on the fact that his DNA had not been found on his alleged victim. On the other hand, prosecutors countered the defendant's claims of innocence with the undeniable amount of evidence that was collected in the case, amid the proof they put forward, which included the CCTV footage, showing his car picking Samantha up in 5 points and driving away, the quarts of her blood that were found in his car, her bloody footprint on the vehicle's back window, allegations that he tried to use her bank card at an ATM after disposing of her body, cell phone trackers that placed their devices in the same place at the time of the murder, and the fact that he lived near where her remains were discovered. A handwriting expert was also brought in to compare Roland's handwriting to a list that was written on a piece of paper found in his home, on which it was written, duct tape, tape her whole body, gloves, all black, flip phone, gasoline, matches. The expert testified that it was most likely that Roland wrote the list, which sounded as if it was a plan for the dreadful act. The prosecutors called 31 witnesses to testify, including someone who witnessed Roland cleaning the weapon, the pawn shop owner, to whom he tried to sell Samantha's cell phone, and his ex-girlfriend, who claimed her daughter had blood on her shoe after being in Roland's car following the murder. Roland did not call any witnesses, and none of his family members testified on his behalf. Yet he continued to assert his innocence and pleaded with the judge. The jury reached a guilty verdict in just 1 hour, and Nathaniel Roland was sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. In the wake of Samantha's murder, her parents Seymour and Marcy Josephson took it upon themselves to ensure that no one else suffered the same fate as their beloved daughter. To achieve this, they started the What's My Name Foundation, which encourages people of all ages to ask rideshare drivers to identify them by name before entering a stranger's vehicle. The Josephsons also advocated for a safety protocol they call SAMI, which stands for Stop, Ask, Match, and Inform. Additionally, in the aftermath of Samantha's tragedy, the rideshare industry implemented measures to protect both drivers and passengers, such as the issuance of a personalized 4-digit code that riders could use to confirm through the app that they were getting into the correct car. Samantha Lee Josephson's untimely death sent shockwaves through the hearts of her family and friends. Pain they bear is immeasurable, a testament to the bright light that Samantha was in their lives. Her story is a stark reminder that tragedy can strike unexpectedly. May her memory inspire us to be vigilant, look out for one another, and work collectively toward creating a world where safety and compassion prevail. Born on November 1, 2005 in Scotland, Amber Gibson was the second child of Anne-Marie Adams and Peter Gibson. She joined the family 2 years after the birth of their first child, Connor Gibson. Amber, a beautiful red-haired baby, contrasted sharply with her brother, who had fair skin and dark hair. Their striking looks and cheerful personalities made them stand out. However, their home was marred by domestic violence. From a tender age, Amber and Connor witnessed their father's abusive behavior towards their mother. Peter's violence knew no bounds, causing physical, emotional, and mental harm to Anne-Marie. He also had a criminal history, which included assaults on 2 minors and the abuse of an unknown woman. Due to these dire circumstances, both Amber and Connor were removed from their parental home and placed in the care of social services. After a thorough evaluation, they were relocated to live with the Niven family. Craig and Carol Niven, along with their 2 daughters, provided a nurturing and harmonious environment. This new home offered Amber and Connor a chance for a loving and dignified life, far removed from their troubled beginnings. At the ages of 3 and 5 respectively, Amber and Connor found solace and security with the Nivens. Connor even reassured Amber, saying they were finally safe. Meanwhile, their biological father, Peter, was convicted and sentenced to prison for his crimes. Craig and Carol Niven committed themselves to being exemplary parents. Their dedication led to the permanent custody of both children. Despite this positive change, Connor's past trauma began to manifest as he entered adolescence. Hoping it was just a phase, Craig and Carol took steps to address his needs, including enrolling him in a secondary school for children with social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. Amber, in contrast, was flourishing. She displayed remarkable human qualities despite her early hardships. Generous, caring, and kind-hearted, Amber had an incredible perspective on life. She loved art and singing and attended Morehouse Academy Bathgate. Her teachers and classmates admired her brilliance and vivacity, noting her big dreams and aspirations for the future. Amber's adoptive parents couldn't have been more pleased, and her foster sisters, Zero, were equally happy to have her around. However, Connor's behavior became increasingly concerning. Former classmates described him as unpleasant and noted that he spoke about harming others. There were even rumors that he had threatened a baby during that period. At home, things were no better. Craig eventually decided that leaving Connor alone with his younger sister was not advisable. He mentioned that they were not a good combination together, but never elaborated further. Despite the conflicts, Amber remained loyal to her brother, always trying to keep the peace. Then, an unexplained event occurred. Although Amber seemed like an ideal foster child, at 14, the care arrangement was terminated and she moved to the Hill House Children's Unit in Hamilton. Paradoxically, her problematic brother stayed with the Nivens for another 2 years until he turned 18. Shortly after, Connor moved to the Blue Triangle homeless shelter. Despite the distance, Amber ensured that Connor remained a constant presence in her life. When Amber was 16, she crossed paths with Jamie Stars, a 20-year-old leading a chaotic lifestyle, living just 3 miles from her new residence. Jamie had been removed from his parents' care at 3 years old and had led a troubled life, including substance abuse and criminal behavior. In May 2021, assaulted a young woman in the area. Taking advantage of her intoxicated state, he proceeded without her consent. When the victim reported the assault to the authorities, Jamie sent threatening messages to her friend via social media, attempting to coerce her into withdrawing the complaint. Despite the friend's testimony, his identity was legally protected. Jamie was charged with the assault and attempting to pervert the course of justice, resulting in his arrest. However, he was soon released on bail. In June 2021, Amber traveled to Bothwell, the place where Jamie lived. Although she didn't know Jamie, they ended up in the same lodging unit. That night, while Amber was asleep, Jamie attacked and assaulted her. Amber awoke to find herself undressed, with Jamie, also naked, beside her. She had no recollection of embracing or kissing him, leading to speculation that he might have drugged her, though no tests were conducted to confirm this. Gathering her courage, Amber reported the assault to the police. She identified Jamie from a photo lineup. The police started investigating the case. In July, Jamie faced justice again. Witnesses included the Amber and the first victim. Their testimonies revealed Jamie's method of preying on vulnerable girls. Jamie appeared in court via video link from police custody. His defense argued that his actions might be linked to his traumatic childhood. However, acknowledging his difficult past, the High Court judged him for his poor choices. Jamie was found guilty of both assaults. His name added indefinitely to the sex offender registry. He was also convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice and breaching bail conditions. The sentencing hearing at the High Court in Edinburgh soon followed. One of the first to speak was the defense attorney, who emphasized that the authorities should consider the sentencing guidelines for individuals under 25 years old. In Scotland, the law suggests that younger people should receive lighter sentences due to their emotional immaturity and higher potential for rehabilitation. To support his argument, the defense lawyer pointed out a report indicating that Jamie exhibited cognitive and emotional immaturity. After hearing the defense's case, the judge acknowledged the relevance of Jamie's age and difficult background. However, he reminded Jamie and everyone in attendance that the crimes were still severe, even describing them as atrocious due to their impact on innocent victims. Consequently, the judge sentenced Jamie to 10.5 years in prison. Moreover, given the high risk of reoffending, Jamie was ordered to be under supervision for 2 years following his release. After the hearing, the police stated that the evidence and testimony provided by Amber were crucial in securing the conviction. Throughout this challenging process, Connor reached out to the Hill House Children's Unit to talk to his sister. Despite knowing his volatile temperament, Amber clung to the hope of reconnecting with her only available family member. The residence manager tried to discourage her from contacting Connor, but her efforts were in vain. Amber's close friend recalled that, despite their turbulent relationship, Amber had a special bond with Connor and was eager to see him. However, just as suddenly as he appeared, he disappeared, leaving her with unanswered questions. Amber tried to move forward with her life as best as she could, demonstrating an enviable spirit and determination. After a few months, Connor resurfaced. Likely driven by genuine affection for her only biological family member, Amber was excited when he expressed his desire to meet. They arranged a time and date and met in downtown Hamilton on the night of Friday, November 26, 2021. Overjoyed by her brother's presence, Amber took a selfie with him and posted it on her social media profile. It was the last time anyone heard from her. Around 10 p.m., security cameras captured the siblings walking together through the streets of Hamilton. At some point, out of the camera's view, Connor attacked Amber. He assaulted her, inflicted severe head and body injuries, and then strangled her until she died. About 90 minutes later, without attempting to hide the body, Connor headed back to the hostel where he was staying. Security cameras recorded his disheveled state, and footage showed him collapsing against a metal barrier. He eventually pulled himself together and disposed of his blood-stained clothes. Just before midnight, he returned to the hostel and told a staff member that he and his sister had argued. Later, another camera showed Connor going to the dumpsters outside the building with a plastic bucket in hand. He also called the Hill House Children's Unit, telling them not to worry if Amber didn't return, insisting that she was fine. Despite his assurances, the authorities reported Amber missing that same night. On Friday, November 26, 2021, retired William Corrigan took his 45-year-old son, Stephen Corrigan, to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Due to a recent fall, Stephen had his arm in a sling and needed extra support from his father. After getting vaccinated, Stephen decided to take a night walk and stumbled upon Amber's abandoned body. Rather than alerting the police, Stephen committed his own heinous acts by desecrating Amber's remains. He then concealed her body among leaves and bushes before leaving. Unaware of Amber's tragic fate, her loved ones and the authorities searched for her everywhere. Meanwhile, Connor sent a cryptic message to a group of 5 friends, saying he needed help with something without specifying details. To create an alibi, he messaged Amber asking if she was okay. He then told his friends that he had resolved the issue on his own. As the search for Amber continued, Craig and Carol grew increasingly anxious. They hadn't heard from Connor until a call on Sunday, November 28, 2021, when he told them that he and Amber had fought the previous Friday. Later that same Sunday, the police finally discovered Amber's body. Her underwear had been torn, and she had suffered severe head trauma. After securing the scene, investigators searched the area and found Amber's blood-stained shorts and t-shirt in a nearby dumpster. After informing her loved ones of the tragic outcome, the detective team began reconstructing Amber's movements from the last time she was seen to when her life was taken and her body left in the middle of nowhere. At a press conference, one of the detectives appealed to the public for information. He emphasized the importance of understanding the events leading to Amber's fatal attack and urged anyone with information to come forward to help bring closure to her family. Knowing the community's fear and parents' concerns for their daughter's safety, he stressed that capturing the perpetrator was crucial for public safety. He pointed out that Amber was last seen in a busy part of town on a Friday night, suggesting there must have been many witnesses. He called on anyone who saw her to contact the authorities. Following the press conference, some people came forward with potential information, but none provided useful leads. Investigators continued their work, and the forensic pathologist's report highlighted that Amber was found covered in mud and had died from neck compression. Blood stains found on her jacket were sent for DNA analysis, which revealed a chilling truth. The blood matched her brother Connor's DNA. Additionally, Connor's DNA was found on Amber's forcibly removed underwear. Another unidentified male DNA sample was also discovered, complicating the case further. With such evidence in hand, Connor became the prime suspect in the case. He continued to feign innocence and create false alibis that quickly fell apart. One such clumsy attempt was a social media post on December 1st, where he pretended to pay tribute to his sister, lavishing her with praise and claiming he would miss her dearly. The next day, he searched the internet on his phone for ways to mislead the police. He also posted several angry messages on his social media accounts. Hours later, he was arrested. Meanwhile, the details of the case were kept under strict confidentiality to avoid jeopardizing the investigation. However, some information leaked, and it became known that the victim's brother was under police scrutiny. Feeling the pressure from the police, Connor did not give up trying to distance himself from the crime. Instead, he pushed a local media outlet to publish a tribute to his sister. Forensic DNA analyses and other evidence continued to provide valuable information at a rapid pace. It was determined that Connor's clothing had traces of his sister's blood. Additionally, the analysis revealed that the third biological material belonged to Stephen Corrigan. A cybercrime expert analyzed Connor's phone and uncovered further evidence that clarified the case. Suspicious messages to his group of 5 friends and the one sent to Amber, knowing he had just killed her, were particularly incriminating. His internet search history only further exposed him. As these details began to emerge publicly, the complex story of Amber's tragic end came to light. Connor had to appear in Hamilton Sheriff Court to face charges of murder, sexual assault, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Prosecutors stated that Amber had complete trust in her brother, which he brutally betrayed by taking her life. The court ruled that Connor should remain in police custody pending further investigations and court appearances. Stephen Corrigan was also arrested shortly thereafter. On January 13, 2022, he appeared in Hamilton Sheriff Court, charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty. Like Connor, Stephen was held in police custody awaiting his trial. The year 2022 was filled with legal proceedings, making it an extremely challenging time for Carol and her husband, Craig, who were grappling with the grief of losing Amber and the shock of Connor's possible guilt. On November 1st, 2022, which would have been Amber's 17th birthday, her friends and family celebrated her memory. They shared heartfelt messages and wishes for her eternal rest. Along with photos of her on social media, Carol changed her profile picture to one of Amber, finding a measure of peace in the gesture. feeling that it symbolized having done everything possible for her. Additionally, Amber's loved ones created a memorial under a bridge near where her body was found. They placed bouquets, balloons, and candles in her honor. Unfortunately, the memorial was vandalized a few days later when vandals set fire to a nearby dumpster, causing flames to spread. In response, family and friends held a gathering in a park, releasing balloons, some shaped like the letter A for Amber, into the sky. While the wound from Amber's loss remained fresh, Connor's trial finally took place in July 2023. Throughout the trial, Connor denied any involvement in the crime and the sexual assault against his sister. Despite his denials, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His defense lawyer attempted to garner some sympathy from the court by highlighting Connor's lifelong neglect and emotional abuse, suggesting these factors could explain some of his actions. Next, the Director of Health and Social Care testified, describing the case as desperately sad and distressing. The court also heard that Connor appeared unshaken when speaking with Craig on the day Amber's body was found. Craig testified about Connor's increasingly problematic behavior. After a 13-day trial, the Glasgow High Court found Connor guilty of all 3 charges. The judge described the crime as depraved and warned Connor that he would face severe consequences. 15 days later, Stephen faced justice for his involvement. During his trial, he tried to present an unassailable alibi, claiming he spent the night at his elderly father's home and had spent much of the time playing computer games. However, the evidence against him continued to Stephen also claimed that he didn't know why his DNA was found on Amber's body. While William corroborated much of his son's account, he admitted to the jury that he couldn't be certain of Stephen's actions during most of that weekend. Ultimately, Stephen was found guilty of attempting to pervert the course of justice and disturbing public order. In September 2023, during a joint hearing, both men received their sentences. Connor Gibson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years before he can be considered for parole. Stephen received a 9-year prison sentence. In a statement following the trial, Craig and Carol acknowledged that their lives would never be the same. They described Amber as the most generous, caring, compassionate, and admirable person they had ever known. Heather, just 22 years old, had recently embarked on her college journey, settling into her job, and it felt like life was full of promise. Maple's smile and laughter were contagious, and her constant chatter filled the air. She radiated warmth and energy, uplifting everyone around her. Everything changed on January 7, 2015, when Heather Maples didn't show up for work. Her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, partly unclothed. Who had the right to take Heather Maples' life? Detectives faced a challenging investigation because Heather had no enemies, and the motive behind this crime remained unclear. If not for one small detail, Heather Maples' death could have remained unsolved, and the criminal would have gone unpunished. On a typical morning at the real estate agency in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price arrived at work and began her usual tasks. Heather, her friend and colleague, was running late, which wasn't surprising to Kelsey, as Heather was known for her lack of punctuality. Kelsey started calling Heather to wake her up, but received no answer. The previous night, Heather had planned to go to a bar with some friends and had asked Kelsey to come get her if she overslept or didn't answer her calls. Therefore, Kelsey wasn't concerned, and went to Heather's apartment to wake her up. The girls' apartments were located in the same complex where they worked. Upon arriving, Kelsey found the front door unlocked. Easily entering inside, she saw her friend lying on the bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. Assuming Heather had a wild night, Kelsey tried to wake her up, but there was no response. She then tapped Heather's foot, attempting to rouse her from her sleep, which no one would ever interrupt again. Maple's foot was so cold that Kelsey literally jumped back in horror at the realization of what had happened. Kelsey Price, in horror, stepped out of the apartment and called 911. Soon, emergency services were on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, and the forensic team meticulously combed through the apartment. Heather was indeed partially undressed, with signs of blows on her face. The hair of the poor girl was soaked in blood, which was also splattered on the walls. It was clear she had been brutally beaten, tortured, and actually assaulted. Massey and his colleague Detective Maples, coincidentally sharing Heather's surname, recalled this crime as a horrifying nightmare. That's understandable, as witnessing such a heart-wrenching scene is extremely difficult. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother jokingly called Heather a hurricane baby. This nickname was entirely justified, as many envied the energy and courage that Heather possessed. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather welcomed her brother, Ryan, into her life with great joy. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with significant developmental delays, and the older sister, of her own accord, dedicated all her free time to him. She took care of him, happily spent time with him, taught him to speak, walk, and eat on his own. Heather was in the 7th grade at the time and devoted all the following years until graduation to Ryan, showing immense love and dedication to her brother. At the age of 22, Heather Maples made the bold decision to leave her Texas home and embark on a new chapter in Tennessee, pursuing her dream of becoming a psychologist. The journey began with a call from her former classmate, Chaz, inviting her to join him in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he studied. According to him, it was the perfect place for Heather, with a small college town where she could get a great opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted, and in January 2015, the future student went to Chaz in Murfreesboro. By the way, their relationship soon turned romantic. A completely different life began for the girl. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found a job in the office of the residential complex where they lived. Maples was balancing work with her college preparations. Her friends and family supported her. Everything seemed to be going well, but soon her relationship with Chaz began to crumble, which led to a breakup, and Chaz moved away. At the beginning of August, she excitedly called her mother to share this wonderful news. She had been accepted to college. Her mother, filled with pride, was thrilled for Heather's achievement. However, a week later, Heather failed to show up for work, sparking concern and uncertainty. The detectives understood that considering the nature of the crime, it could have been related to Heather's personal life. At that point, most of her friends were considered suspects, and frankly speaking, there were reasons for that. Upon examining the apartment, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Heather likely knew her attacker and possibly let them in herself. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, several important pieces of evidence were discovered. Unknown DNA and a hair that did not belong to the victim. All of this was sent for analysis to identify the suspect. However, the most significant piece of evidence was a clear bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed. Detective Massey explained that if someone had deliberately dipped their finger in ink and intentionally left their mark, it wouldn't have been so clear and precise. Of course, this print was sent for analysis as well. Additionally, Heather's mobile phone was found in the apartment, but without the password, accessing its contents was impossible. This is where Kelsey came in handy. She played a crucial role, not only helping with the phone, but also deciding to inform Heather's mother of her death, believing it would be better coming from someone who loved and cared for Heather. Detective Massey hoped to get a lot of information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. He wanted to know everything about the victim's personal life, especially her relationship with Chaz. Kelsey told the detective that the relationship was quite tense, as Chaz had obvious anger management issues, and sometimes he was too aggressive and cruel towards Heather, so the girl decided to end the relationship herself. Therefore, the police immediately decided to investigate Chaz. But an unexpected turn of events occurred. A young man named Michael was determined to access the crime scene despite the caution tape. He had keys to Heather's apartment. According to Michael, on the evening before her death, Heather called him and invited him for dinner, which he accepted. Immediately after dinner, Michael went home, unlike Heather, who went to a local bar with friends. But later, Heather reached out to Michael for help. As Michael recounted, Heather was in trouble. A young man named Ortavio was bothering her and was quite aggressive. Immediately after the incident, Michael offered to drive Heather home. As per his statement, it was around 2:30 in the morning on August 7th, the last time he saw Heather. Additionally, during the interrogation, Michael mentioned that Heather's front door should have been unlocked because he had her keys since she was dressed in a dress and didn't have pockets to carry them, and he simply forgot to return them after unlocking the door. Michael was very disappointed and did not seem like a liar at all, but investigators had to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. They also contacted the bar to obtain surveillance footage, which confirmed everything Michael had said during the interrogation. Analysis confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene did not match his. After Michael was cleared as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ortavio. With Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's mobile phone, interest in Ortavio significantly increased. Detectives discovered that Heather had messaged Ortavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. But why did Heather call Ortavio to her home after Michael had saved her from him? The answer was simple. They were friends and became more persistent than usual at the bar. Heather was caught off guard. She wasn't prepared for this. Now the detectives needed to speak with Ortavio to get his side of the story. The detectives immediately realized that Ortavio was unaware of Heather's death. But what if he was somehow involved in this case? Meanwhile, the interrogation continued. The detectives intensified their questioning of Ortavio, using a tough interrogation method that not every suspect could withstand. Ortavio was shocked by what he heard. It seemed he genuinely didn't know what had happened to Heather. Following the interrogation, he willingly agreed to a DNA test, confident that it would clear his name. The results proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Without any leads, the detectives worked practically around the clock, reviewing surveillance footage, scrutinizing every detail provided by witnesses. On the 9th day of the investigation, as Detective Massey was preparing to leave the office late at night, he received a crucial call from one of the directors of the forensic laboratory. Massey finally got the answer regarding the bloody fingerprint that was lifted from Heather's bed. It belonged to a young man named Brandon Bowling, whose fingerprints were on file due to his employment at a company where he previously worked. This development prompted Detective Massey to approach the interrogation very gently, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what happened that night. The detectives knew he was lying because the fingerprint was fresh. It seemed that Brandon understood he was caught, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, detectives requested a DNA test from Brandon, suggesting that if he was innocent, the test would prove it. Brandon did as he was asked, perhaps hoping to be released from police custody. But that did not happen. The investigators decided not to wait for the test results. The match of the fingerprint provided substantial grounds for the next step. The police immediately sent a request to the court for permission to access Brandon's phone, which could help the investigation confirm his movements, track calls and texts on the night of the crime. However, they were unprepared for what they found on his phone after the court approval. The video from Brandon Bowling's phone was one of the most shocking, even to the most experienced detectives. In this video, the room of the corpse Heather was captured. Brandon recorded everything, from intimate acts to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. In February 2018, Brandon Richmond Bowling pleaded guilty to the attack on Heather Maples. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a speech that surprised many. When the trial ended in the corridor, Jennifer approached Bowling's mother. Jennifer simply hugged this woman, saying that they both lost their children that day. Unfortunately, Brandon Bowling never explained his motives. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think Brandon's motive was, if there was one? The incredible case of Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Laurel Whitaker was born on August 16, 1969, as the fourth of 5 children to her parents. According to her mom, Laura Andrews, Michelle was extremely close to her entire family. However, this changed when they moved from Illinois to Gastonia, North Carolina, and Michelle's once happy demeanor began to fade. As she entered her teenage years, Michelle part-time as a waitress, and was barely getting by. One evening in 1999, Michelle met a man named David after her shift ended, and he offered to give her a ride home. Michelle accepted, but soon regretted her decision. Instead of taking her home, David took her to a secluded area where he assaulted her and forced her into intimate contact. He was arrested a year later, pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and received an 8-year prison sentence. Just before she disappeared, was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. Michelle's parents decided it was time to take drastic measures. They contacted the police and asked them to hold Michelle in custody until a spot in a rehabilitation center became available. Although it was a difficult decision, her parents felt it was the only way to help Michelle in her situation. However, Michelle became extremely upset by this, and from that point on, her relationship with her mother significantly deteriorated. Unfortunately, was mistakenly released from jail without receiving the court-ordered treatment for her substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5, 2002, Michelle had an argument with her mother and stormed out of the house in a bad mood. 3 days later, the man she was staying with contacted her mother, Laura Andrews, to inform her that he couldn't find Michelle after they had had an argument. This is how Laura learned of her daughter's disappearance. Laura immediately sought help from a friend who worked at the local police station. But the police, familiar with Michelle's lifestyle, advised her to wait a little longer, assuring her that Michelle would likely show up on her own. However, 2 weeks passed and Michelle failed to return home. On August 21st, Laura filed an official missing persons report, and local law enforcement began investigating Michelle Whitaker's disappearance. During their investigation, they discovered the last place Michelle was spotted, a truck stop. This information came from a local resident named Doug, who had met Michelle by chance on the street the day before she disappeared. Doug recounted that he had stopped his motorcycle outside a bar where Michelle was sitting and struck up a conversation with her. Michelle told him that she had had a fight with her boyfriend and he had thrown her out of the house. Later that evening, they visited 2 bars together, playing a few games of billiards at one of them. They then took a ride on Doug's motorcycle until dawn, after which they went to his house. Thus was revealed that Michelle Whitaker had spent her last evening visiting local bars, and Doug was the last person to have seen her alive. This made Doug the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance. According to his testimony, Michelle had planned to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a resort city on the Atlantic coast where she hoped to earn good money working in local bars and restaurants. Doug claimed that he dropped Michelle off at a truck stop, but only after giving her some clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts, and some money to buy coffee and newspapers. He said he wished her good luck before leaving. To verify Doug's story, the police gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. They also tested the man Michelle had been staying with before she vanished, but found no evidence to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. Police began to consider the possibility that Michelle had actually gone to Myrtle Beach, which is approximately 250 miles from Spartanburg. A few more weeks went by, but there was still no sign of Michelle. Her family and friends were growing increasingly anxious. Despite her anger and resentment towards her parents, they couldn't bring themselves to believe she would abandon her family and go into hiding. Michelle's prolonged disappearance made the local sheriff question her motives. When people travel for extended periods, they typically take some personal belongings with them, but Michelle had left with almost nothing. Moreover, she had a beloved pet dog to which she was deeply attached. Every detective interviewed agreed that Michelle would never willingly abandon her dog. In the meantime, Michelle's parents began driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to their daughter. After receiving multiple tips that Michelle had been spotted on a beach in North Carolina, they headed there immediately. They spent 3 days searching for her, posting flyers and talking to locals, but their efforts ultimately proved fruitless. After 6 months of unsuccessful searches, Laura Andrews started questioning whether her behavior towards her daughter had been right. She had witnessed her daughter's downward spiral and couldn't just stand by. Laura wanted to protect her in any way possible. Additionally, she suspected that the 1999 brutal attack Michelle suffered might have contributed to her disappearance. Laura couldn't forgive herself for the hurtful words she spoke to Michelle after the attack, despite the assault being a terrible act by a stranger. Laura initially blamed Michelle for taking a destructive path and causing harm to herself, which only damaged Michelle's self-esteem further with her words. From the sheriff's office, it was assumed Michelle had motives to escape due to her reputation. Detectives thought she'd eventually be arrested, but a year passed with no results. The police were alarmed that Michelle left no digital traces, which wasn't a good sign. Both police and family wondered if Michelle was a crime victim, possibly falling prey to a truck driver. But this theory remained unsubstantiated. 2 more years passed with no leads. On the 3rd anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, after police and Laura Andrews visited the truck stop where Michelle was last seen, local TV stations revisited the story. Just days after Michelle's story aired on TV news, the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office received a strange letter. The anonymous letter, handwritten on a small sheet of paper, claimed to reveal the location of Michelle Whitaker's body. A crude, homemade map accompanied the letter, pinpointing the exact spot. Despite its amateurish appearance, the letter was well written and proper, lending it an air of credibility. The sheriff, accompanied by search dogs, embarked on a search of a rural area 25 miles from where Michelle was last seen. This development came 3 years after her disappearance, and her family was torn between despair and hope. Some had reluctantly accepted that Michelle might be dead, while others clung to the possibility that she was alive and safe. The search dogs were unable to detect any scent, and the operation was eventually called off. Although relieved that nobody was found, the investigators remained perplexed by the letter. Handwriting analysis and DNA evidence from the envelope suggested that the author was a woman, but her identity remained unknown. In 2006, Michelle's parents relocated to Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is 65 miles from Spartanburg. A year later, on the 5th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, the whole family gathered at the church. Michelle's mother, Laura Andrews, did not want to treat the gathering as a memorial service, because Michelle's body had not been found, and there was still a faint hope that she might be alive. Another year passed, and Detective William Gary took over the investigation of Michelle's disappearance. At the time, he was handling a dozen unsolved cases, including Michelle's. Since many years had gone by without any evidence that Michelle was still alive, her case was considered a felony. The lack of evidence led the investigators to believe that something tragic had likely occurred. A 19-year-old girl, Linda, didn't show up for breakfast and then lunch one day. When they sent her brother Howard to check up on her, he saw something that would scar him for life. Why did Linda not come home for breakfast? Did she oversleep? What did Howard see? We are going to reveal a case which was buried under a thick layer of snow about half a century ago. The snow has now finally melted and the killer is now behind bars. Come with us as we look at what exactly happened on the fateful day of a cold February back in 1978. February is the month when Buffalo, New York's second largest city, gets the highest amount of snowfall, and this is where our case today takes us. It is located at the head of the Niagara River across the Canadian border from southern Ontario. Linda Tashari was a bartending student living alone in the family cottage, a little behind the larger home where the rest of her family resided. Even though she lived alone at the guest house, she was always in contact with everyone. Well, she only lived about 5 minutes away. As Howard, her brother, described her, she was the one who the family members talked to if they had problems. She liked to keep the family together. It was the 8th of February, 1978. It was past noon. Her lunch was cold, and when Linda's brother went over to the cottage to fetch her, the doors were invitingly open. When he entered the cottage, he was greeted by a scene so horrifying that it would scar him forever, or at least for 44 years. The house was warm, and no one dared open a window. Buffalo was in the grips of a blizzard, and there was no one outside. The streets were empty, and everything was covered in a blanket of snow. It was 8 in the morning on the 8th of February, 1978. Linda's family, her mom and her brother, saw someone walking away from the cottage behind their home and getting into a green Chevrolet Nova parked across the street from their house. He was a man who was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, had a medium build, wearing a ski cap and a navy blue coat. Howard Tashari, Linda's brother, assumed the person was Linda's boyfriend. Who else could it be? He must have stayed the night and just had to get home early. The day went rather normally, but it seemed like Linda had overslept. She wasn't there for breakfast. It was lunchtime when Linda's mother sent Howard, who was 18 at the time, to wake her up. Linda would normally come to the main house to check her mail, but she hadn't that day, which concerned her mother. She sent Howard to check up on her, and when he went to the cottage, he found the side door was unlocked. He pushed the door as it creaked open. The sound of the radio was the first thing he noticed as he stepped inside. As he made his way towards the hallway, he spotted blood stains on the floor. He knew something was dreadfully wrong as he went deeper into the room. He was horrified to find his sister in her pajamas lying lifeless, staring at him in a pool of blood on the living room floor next to the doorway to her bedroom. Howard, trembling as he stuttered her name, knelt beside her as her ice-cold body stared at him. He was frozen for a moment with a million thoughts running through his mind. How could he break this news to his mother? But he had to. He went back and explained what he saw. They called the police. They knew it was the stranger, but he had been too far away for them to identify the man. In the hours after Linda was found fatally stabbed, the Buffalo police detectives began their investigation and gathered evidence from the crime scene. At the time, the area was covered in snow. The police officers who arrived at the crime scene found a trail of blood leading away from the cottage. This led investigators to believe that the killer had injured himself somehow. With limited resources, they had very little to work with. The Buffalo Police Department notified local hospitals and medical stores in the hopes that the killer would seek medical attention to tend to his wounds. The entire cottage was filled with DNA evidence, with the killer's blood splattered on several rooms and on several items, including a Grand Funk Railroad vinyl record cover. Linda has been stabbed 13 times and had wounds on her face, neck and back. Linda has bruises on her face, abdomen and arm which were sustained at the time of the murder. The autopsy revealed that Linda died of blood loss. The police worked through the usual suspects, speaking to Linda's boyfriend, her stepfather, and the handyman, but nothing came up, and soon they were out of clues and no arrests were made. The motive of the murder was ruled to likely be a robbery gone wrong. The killer had seen the cottage away from the main home. This attracted him, but when he entered the cottage, he saw a 19-year-old sleeping there. Wanting to steal things, he moved around the cottage looking for precious items to take. But it all failed when Linda woke up, and in the commotion he had no other option but to kill the witness. But the question remained. Who was the mystery man who was leaving the cottage that morning? Who was the man in that navy blue coat who got into a green Chevrolet Nova? With no other leads, the case went cold. All of the evidence collected in the case, including the DNA evidence, was eventually packaged in 39 envelopes and bags stacked into boxes put away in storage about 2 months after the crime. Even though the killer had fled the crime scene, he had left his DNA. Back in the 1980s, DNA analysis did not exist. It was determined that the blood found at the crime scene was a different blood type from that of Linda. The cold case squad began looking into the case again in 2006, and the detectives sent about 40 pieces of evidence to Erie County Central Police Service's forensic laboratory for analysis. The Tasharis knew the DNA evidence was the key to the killer, but the technology wasn't advanced enough to decipher it back then. But when the technology was upgraded in April 2016, the family members contacted a homicide detective who was on the cold case squad, seeking help. The detective tracked down 14 other men whose names were in the original case file, as well as others who might have known Linda around the time she was killed. These were Linda's stepfather, a couple of men who lived in the neighborhood at the time, and an old boyfriend. There was also a man who helped Linda's sister move. All of them willingly submitted their DNA profile, and they were all ruled out as the killer by the detectives. The team began developing DNA profiles with the blood collected from the crime scene. But the DNA wasn't complete, and so they could only create a partial DNA profile. There were parts of genetic information missing, making it complicated. A partial DNA profile is a profile made from a sample, which is considered to be partial and does not have enough genetic materials available to sample. The sample could have degraded over time, and the information might not be as accurate as they want it to be. That was exactly the reason why these two DNA samples from the crime scene were not allowed to be uploaded to the National DNA Database. But the rules and the standards changed 3 years later in 2019. The lab staff uploaded all the DNA data they had in their possession, including the ones from the crime scene. And the next day, they had the face of the killer. The National DNA Database had a match, and it came from Oregon. They finally had a name: John Soberin. This felt too good to be true, and so they cross-checked him with the original case file, but his name did not appear anywhere. Soberin had to have lived in the area in Buffalo at the time of the homicide. They went through the file again, and from the testimony given by Linda's mother and brother, they found that the suspect had driven a green Chevrolet Nova. That was enough for them to zero in on the suspect. The detectives asked for the records from the Department of Motor Vehicles to see people who owned the described vehicle. And even if they did not find John Soberin, they did find people who were connected to Soberin. The first address was to a woman with whom Soberin had a child, and the second one was registered to Soberin's adoptive mother in Tonawanda. It was enough for the detectives to determine that Soberin lived around the area at the time of the murder. The records also showed that he had lived in many other states since the 1980s, including Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Arizona, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Ohio, which earned him the name the Drifter. When the investigators took Soberin in for something that happened in the 1970s, he immediately asked for a lawyer. At the arrest, the county forensic lab performed additional DNA analysis on the original crime scene evidence, which included the bloodstains on the sleeves of the Grand Funk Railroad album, and the analysis report was consistent with Soberin's DNA. Back in the 70s, Soberin was nicknamed Chief the Thief. He was known to steal bicycles. He also has been arrested in relation to an incident involving property damage. He had been charged with robbery. There were a lot of coincidences that fit in perfectly. It was very likely that he was the man that Tashari saw walking away from the cottage that morning. He also had a green Chevrolet Nova. The crime scene looked like a robbery gone wrong. He took pride in his stealing ventures. In the case of Linda, could be one of the unfortunate ones where he broke into the cottage, but unexpectedly there was somebody inside. And to eliminate the witness, he took the drastic step of becoming a murderer. On the 11th of October this year, the jury found Soberin guilty of second-degree murder, and the prosecution and the defense both agreed that the victim and the murderer did not know each other. Soberin faces a maximum of 25 years to life as he awaits sentencing on the 13th of December. Do you think if they had stopped the man walking away that they would have at least known what had happened in the cottage? Maybe he would have tried to escape, and it would still have taken 4 decades for them to find justice. Maybe they could have got to Linda sooner and saved her. But at least now, all these years later, the family has closure on what happened. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.